everybody, and it's great to be here. Really, really great to be here. Some faces I'm very familiar with, some that I'm not as much. And don't worry about the microphone. I have a Cork accent, so it'll carry like none of you know why they're there. So it's really, really great, really great to be here. And now we couldn't have predicted that the day that we had this Brexit discussion would be the day that the great draft withdrawal bill was published. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off briefly by giving you the state of play. So basically what happened today was that the EU produced a draft, what they call withdrawal bill, and that is putting forward to the UK how it proposes that the post-Brexit relationship will operate. So in essence what it said was there's an agreement already about the budget bill. So what that means is that the UK will have to pay between 40 to 45 billion euro to exit. There was an agreement that has kind of changed a little bit today on the deal around citizenship. So that means that if anybody from the EU comes to the UK during the transition period, that they can stay up to 5 years before applying for citizenship directly. And then the third thing, and this was most contentious of all, so the third thing that happened was they said if it is the case that Northern Ireland, if it is the case that in order to be avoiding, sure, the Cork accent still carries. If it is the case that a hard Brexit would be put forward, that then Northern Ireland would have to stay as part of the EU, and that has been outwardly rejected today by Theresa May. So it's very contentious on the island of Britain and also in Northern Ireland at the moment. That's what's going on there. But in particular, what I'm going to talk about is I'm just going to take you through a SWOT analysis of what is happening in Ireland. So, what are Ireland's strengths within this whole Brexit conversation? Well, first and foremost, its key strength is its relationship with Europe. At the moment, Ireland has the solidarity of the 26 other states. Donald Tusk said in Dublin a little while ago, he said, the future of the UK and its relationship with the EU lies in Dublin. If Ireland is not happy with the way in which the border situation evolves, well then the EU is not going to be happy. So we have Europe on our side. But also another strength is our relationship with the UK. We understand them, we speak the same language as them, we have a very similar culture to them, we share a land border with them, and so on. And from that point of view, it's been a very, very helpful relationship to have along the way as well. And the third thing, and this is where it comes down to you, the third thing is that we have a fantastic international architecture. Last month, Kieran Cannon published the second diaspora directory. And what that is 769, I'll say that again, 769 Irish organisations right around the world. There are 769 organisations like IIBN. Now I've been here for approximately 3.5 days. In that, Marianne, of course, took me out of the town one night, aided by Maura Kelly, aided by Maura Kelly and Michelle. Second night, last night I was at Digital Irish. Tonight I was here. I could have been at the Ireland Funds during the week. So you see where this is going. Now also, of course, we have a fantastic embassy and an embassy network around the world. We've Enterprise Ireland, we've the IDA, etc. So each of those three things are our key strengths. So number one is our relationship with Europe, number two, our relationship with the UK, and number three is our international architecture. They're the strengths. Now the weaknesses. The funny thing is that I'm going to be talking you through the weaknesses, but none of them were weaknesses 3 years ago. This would have made very, very good business sense. And the first one is the €1 billion of trade that crosses across the Irish Sea every single week. Every single week, Ireland and the UK do €1 billion of trade. And of course, that is now a weakness because that can be exposed to huge change. So that's number one. And number two, and this is a shocking statistic, is that 80% of imports and exports have to go through the UK. So that means that if I'm going to export my product to France, or I'm going to import products from Greece, or I'm going to be doing any type of import or export in Ireland, 80% of it goes through the UK, quite simply because, again, of a land border issue and so on. Now, if you introduce customs, you introduce administration, you introduce tariffs and so on, all of that is then exposed to what could change. And the third thing is all of that trade is then also subject to the way in which the sterling has changed. So on the 23rd of June 2016, €1 was equal to 76 pence. Today I checked it, it's worth 89 pence. Now, so you're up against a huge decline there in the value of the sterling. So that introduces you to two problems. Either you've dropped your prices considerably if you charge in sterling, or else you're dramatically more expensive if you're pricing in euro. So all of those elements are weaknesses. So number one, it's the volume of trade. Number two, it's the physical issue of how much export and import goes through the UK. And number three, it's in the decline in the value of sterling. So moving on from there, I am known as the positive economist, and so I should be presenting opportunities to you. Now, this is a little bit harder, but it's certainly not impossible to do that. So I have been part of the All-Ireland Civil Dialogue. They were 3 different events that were planned by the Department of Foreign Affairs in Dublin. And it was designed to bring all of the bodies, civic, political, economic, business, social, everything. All of us were all brought into the Royal Hospital in Kilmainham, and there was a reason, of course, we were all in the Royal Hospital in Kilmainham to talk about this. King Billy was all looking down on top of us, making sure we were all doing all right. And he did a remarkably good job of it. So we were all in there, and there was 3 different sessions, and I've been at all 3. And what I will say is I have been so impressed myself with how the Irish agencies have put forward solutions for people like you and me in the face of this uncertainty. I don't want to call it challenge, because we all know that's what it is, but particularly in the uncertainty. So just give you some examples. Enterprise Ireland have put together a Brexit scorecard, which actually allows me as a business to put the way in which my business operates through a stress test to see what specific areas are exposed. Intertrade Ireland has created a Start to Prepare grant, and little did I know that Grant Thornton is a supplier in this organisation. So what Intertrade Ireland will do is they will give me a £2,000 voucher, where I would then subsequently go to Peter and I would say, this is my situation, and there Grant Thornton would give me advice paid for by Intertrade Ireland, because I couldn't possibly afford it myself, right? So that is what Intertrade Ireland are doing. Tourism Ireland has gone on a huge offensive right around the world to bring different people to Ireland. So for example, last year there was an increase of 16% of visitors from North America and from Canada. There was an 18% rise from China and from Asia, and there was a 5.5% rise from mainland Europe. So that's what they have done. Board BIA has created a Brexit barometer for all, particularly they're particularly exposed, so that food companies can look at exactly what's been going on from their point of view. So, and of course the IDA last year had 237 new investments, and particularly has been chasing the Brexit overspill business. So there's been a huge offensive of the agencies to help companies like mine. The second thing as well is that what has happened, and well, we'll see how this evolves, is what's called internal hedging. So internal hedging is when let's say I generate revenue in sterling, but now I change my cost base to sterling as well. So we did that. So I have one staff member, she's based in Wales. We were paying her in euro because we wanted stability. And then we could see, like I mentioned the sterling devaluation earlier, we could see what was happening. So we said, you know what, why don't we change her salary to sterling so that then we would be internally hedged? And that's been something that a lot of companies have done. But the other thing is that if we were to take the UK aside, okay, and let's just pretend that as a business environment, it's not open for business. And that's a very hard thing to do as an Irish person, but let's just say it was. Well, where else could we go? And what organisation could help us do that? So I'm just going to tell you a little story about how I have looked at that. So there's an organisation called Enterprise Europe Network. It's based actually in the Chrysler building. I was waving over at them there in case they recognised me from my meeting with them 5 years ago. But I'm not quite that memorable now. But what the Enterprise Europe Network is really, really smart. What it does is it takes all of the bodies that I've mentioned to you, Intertrade, Enterprise Ireland, but also InvestNI, the equivalent in all of the EU states, and further afield. So Enterprise Europe Network is like Enterprise Ireland multiplied by every enterprise organisation in Europe and beyond. So I went to them when we started in business, and I said, I'm looking to export, don't know where, don't know how, can you help me? And they said, well, could you be a little bit more specific? And I said, okay, I am looking for somewhere where we can have a foothold in the market pretty quickly. So I didn't have to wait long. A trade delegation from Malta were coming to Dublin. So anyway, I went in and I met with them, and you know the way we do. I gave them a card, and then they gave me a card back, and you know, I said make sure and see Temple Bar, and they said, God, is it always this cold? And I said, yes, it is, and so on like that. But here's where the magic happened. After that, I came home and I said to my husband, I said, you know, imagine if I went to Malta and I just tried out this export to carry on for the first time. And he said, oh, where is Malta, Susan? And I said, why is that relevant? Well, I said, as long as the pilot knows where it is, it doesn't really bother me. So God bless Michael O'Leary, €30 return later. I had a flight booked to Malta, January 2011, and I followed up with these two guys to wanting to know how they got on in Temple Bar. But here's where the magic happened, was I went back to Enterprise Europe Network and I said, I'm coming to Malta, I don't know, can you do anything for me to try and help me get started? What they did was Dublin Chamber spoke to Finance Malta, because that's what IIBN does, and they organised an itinerary of 15 meetings for me straight away. And then I went back to Malta Enterprise, who I'd met in Dublin, also a member of IIBN, and they organised the driver for me. And that was how we got started there. I'll give you a more recent story with IIBN. Because I'm a member of Enterprise Europe Network, I'm de facto a member of every Chamber of Commerce, InvestNI and so on organisation like that. So I'm on the mailing list of London Chamber, and London Chamber were organising a trade delegation in 2015 out to Abu Dhabi, Dubai and Sharjah. So I said, okay, how much is this going to cost? And it was mostly subsidised by IIBN. £150 later, that's all it cost. You paid for it, God bless you. So £150 later, I had a 5-day trade mission booked out there, and also that was with the UK, Belgium, Hungary, Italy, and one other country that escapes me right now. So that is what they organise, a plethora of trade missions like that. So what Enterprise Europe Network does, it's the biggest business network in the world that nobody knows about. And what it is it combines all of these together. So there is also that opportunity for us as Irish people and Irish businesses is to go further afield like that. So what are our opportunities? Number one is to engage with the agencies. And number two is to imagine, if the UK is not open for business, how do we look further afield and who can help us to do that? And the last part of a SWOT analysis, of course, are the threats. Now, we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. So I'm not going to elaborate a huge amount, but there's 3 key ones that I've identified. Number one is the border. In fact, that's all I need to say. From a business point of view, customs point of view, peace process point of view, every single point of view, the border is the greatest threat for this whole project. And the second one is, and we will elaborate on the border, so I'm not going to do it now. The second one is the risk of us taking our eye off the ball. I don't know if you happen to have heard of a man called Macron. Maybe any of you have heard of Emmanuel Macron? Okay, well, he's now the president of France. Macron has views on Europe which are to create a single Eurozone budget, of 1% of GDP of all the countries, funded by corporation tax. In addition, he also wants to create a single finance minister who would replace the leader of the Eurogroup. He wants to finish off the Capital Markets Union and to create a European Monetary Fund. Now, a lot of people believe in European integration. A lot of Irish people believe it too. That is not, for me, the threat. The threat for me is that we're not talking about it. Is we're all focusing on Brexit and that particular piece of the relationship. And I think there's a real threat that we're taking our eye off the ball on our role and voice in shaping Europe. And the third threat is actually one that I've started to see, started to happen, and we all know how this feels to be the other side. And that is that in the UK, economic growth last year was 1.5%. In the Eurozone, it was 2.7%. In Ireland, it was 7%. So therefore, the UK economy is not doing as well as the Eurozone economy and not doing as well as the Irish economy. Now, what do you do as a business person if your economy at home is not doing as well as economies abroad? You export into them. So therefore, the Irish at home are facing a new competitor, which is a stronger, more hungry UK exporter. And bearing in mind they will have a lower cost base than us because of the decline in the sterling. So we also need to be careful of that import substitution. Bear in mind, that's exactly what we all did in 2010. Well, that's exactly what we did. We went into other markets. So we know how it feels to be the other side, but we do need to be aware, because some of you may be thinking about coming home, some of you may be thinking about doing business at home, or some of you may be thinking about how do we orient our business within Europe. So we do need to be cognizant of all those. So in that whistle-stop tour, where I hope that I have taken you from Edinburgh across to Belfast, right down into Cork, and back into walking through the City of London, this is the state of play tonight, and this is now where I'm going to invite Tony Dunn and Peter Legge to please join me. And you won't have listened to my accent all night, believe me, we've a lot of diversity. Perfect. So, first and foremost, will I put down the mic? Because at this stage it's a prop. I might put that down. Testing. No. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with Tony. So Tony is based here. I don't just mean in New York, I mean physically on this floor in this building. He is based here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by asking Tony a little bit about his own insights. And in typical Irish form, I noticed that, of course, Peter could only be... He was in Fitzpatrick's last night. Before he could even order a beer, he was recognised. When he walked in tonight, he was recognised. And when I put this picture up on my own Facebook page, my husband's cousin said, I worked with Tony Dunn a couple of years ago on the IFSC. Tell him I said hello. So we're among friends tonight. Of course, Chatham House rules kind of operate while Facebook Live is operating at the same time. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there. But we will absolutely be opening this up for questions in a little while. But I'm going to start off by asking Tony about your insights. In terms of the Bank of Ireland customer, both at home and abroad, what are their views on Brexit at the moment and how are they dealing with it?
So I think in general there's a sense of negativity but also fatigue. So when Brexit started off first, we did a lot of outreach to customers. I think we ran 36 SME shows where we went out, talked to the SME, went through the impact. We also did a lot of FX hedging, all that happened. Since then, it's definitely quieted down. I think there's a period where some customers are really getting ahead of it. They're doing the things you would expect really good companies to do. But unfortunately, there's a huge amount out there who are kind of putting their head in the sand. And I think that's a combination of, one, they're not experienced enough to make the investment. They also don't know what that investment entails. But two, it's very hard to make that investment when you don't know what that investment, when you don't know what it's actually going to happen. So there's a lot of talk about hard Brexit, soft Brexit, be part of the custom union, transition period. Yep. And I think all of that, and the longer this goes on, the more it's making people delay decisions they should be making by now.
But is that not exposing them to a lot of business risk, Tony? Because, I mean, in terms of business, we can't wait for the politicians to agree on everything. They say nothing is agreed till everything is agreed. I can't wait. And your customers can't wait. So is that exposing them to a different risk that maybe they're not even seeing?
Absolutely. And it also changes by sector, so it depends kind of what sector you're looking at. More sectors are really going to be impacted, and certain sectors should be doing a lot more. Obviously, the one that is kind of most obvious is the agricultural sector. Yeah. And it's kind of funny, we were saying this before, but over here in America, and especially over the last few years, when you hear about pharmaceuticals and you hear about the Apple, the Google, and all the rest, you forget that the bread and butter of Ireland, especially outside of the main cities, is agriculture.
Literally the bread and butter.
Literally the bread and butter.
Yeah.
And they're going to be so exposed. And the interconnectivity between Ireland and Northern Ireland, like the amount that passes through, to your point, the amount that actually passes through the UK mainland to get to Europe. So they absolutely should not be ignoring it and should be trying to challenge it head on. But I just think that there's a worry that all the uncertainty is making them postpone decisions they shouldn't do.
Well, if anybody is interested in following up specifically on this point, the Copenhagen report said that 90% of the brunt of Brexit will be on 5 sectors, but 50% of it would be to agri-foods because of the tariffs and so on, and also pharma. And if you think about both of those, they would both hit rural Ireland far more than any of the urban areas. So I think that's a very, very important point.
The other point I would make about customers is I don't think the impact has been seen. There was an immediate impact with the devaluation, and since then there's been a lot of talk about Brexit's going to be horrific to the economies. It hasn't been bad to the Irish economy. The UK economy slowed down the last quarter in 2017, but apart from that, the UK economy has proved unbelievably resilient. So therefore, while there's a lot of talk and a lot of scaremongering, people are saying, well, actually, I haven't seen the impact yet. And I think that's making them delay the decision. I think the bad times are coming. It is definitely going to happen. I think there's no other way to say it, but it's going to be negative for the majority of businesses, especially if you're not prepared. For some businesses, there will be opportunities and there will be positives. But if you don't prepare, if you don't start preparing, I think you could be in trouble. And I think the longer you keep your head in the sand, the more difficult that's going to be.
From a calendar point of view, I mentioned what happened today. It was the Great Withdrawal Bill draft. That is supposed to be agreed by the 22nd, 23rd of March, which is a little under a month's time. At the moment, that's looking kind of questionable. Euphemistically, I'm saying that. But after that, then, what is supposed to happen is the divorce agreement completely was supposed to be pinned down, and the new trade agreement starting the formation of that by the autumn. Now, Brexit will actively happen it's supposed to actively happen on the 29th of March 2019. That is the point at which the UK will leave the EU, and Donald Tusk has said that the transition period will not go beyond 31st of December 2020. But at that point, if everything is not sorted at that stage, and I'm being dramatic for effect, but planes will not be able to land in the UK from the EU. That is the level of seriousness that we're dealing with, and those timeframes are tight. Bear in mind the referendum happened, is it what, 20 months ago now at this stage? And we are currently where we are, which is phase one. Phase one was agreed in December, and now that it's transposed into legal text today, it's not at all agreed. So that, like, we need to do an awful lot very, very quickly.
And I think the key line in phase one is nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. Yeah. And that means as much as, and there was a lot of, I think especially from a public side, I think there was a lot of like, oh, the Irish diplomats did really well in phase one to get certain things in and all the rest. I today proved that none of that's actually there yet.
And I think there was a small, one thing that was mentioned at that particular time was that the agreement was politically bulletproof. So we'll see about that now. Peter, you're over from Belfast. Give us what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, kind of first of all say, it's a privilege actually to be over here in the great city and to be involved in this event. So delighted to be involved here today. Useful just to follow on from Mary-Ann's introduction, I'm a UK tax partner with Grant Thornton Ireland, and I'm based in our Belfast office. Now, Grant Thornton in Ireland is structured as an all-island partnership, so we advise on both the UK tax aspects and the Irish tax aspects, and that actually gives us insights into, we deal with a number of sort of companies dealing with sort of cross-border trade between them, and therefore have sort of a knowledge of the issues that they face. In a recent internal survey that we undertook there with a number of our clients, it actually worryingly corresponded to stats there recently produced by Intertrade Ireland, which says that only 9% of businesses with cross-border trade have actually undertaken and have plans to deal with Brexit, which is actually quite scary given sort of where we are in the process. Why could that be? Well, as we said there's still an awful lot of uncertainty out there. We still haven't got into the negotiation stage, which is on trade, which is a key stage. And actually there's a lot of noise out there. There's sort of almost every single day there's a news story about Brexit, and many businesses are just going, oh, just not another story, I'm just going to focus in on the day job and just get on with it here. So those are the reasons why that's happening. But there are sort of we are seeing sort of tangible actions, particularly within a couple of sectors. One, the sort of FS sector, which has sort of fairly complex arrangements in place there, and it's very heavily reliant on sort of passporting. They have taken steps, and equally the agri-food sector, where we talked about sort of currency fluctuations. We talked about the potential tariffs that could apply there. So many of those could make or break those businesses, so they need to take action early. But generally, the SME market haven't really, there's complacency that exists there. Large companies have taken action, but those SMEs haven't taken any action yet, and that complacency still continues to exist. Stats recently showed, and again, this differs with some of the stats that you've seen, Tony, but stats released by Intertrade Ireland indicated that Northern Irish businesses with cross-border activities say that Brexit is going to have a neutral effect. So 86% of businesses think Brexit is going to have a neutral impact on them, and 79% thought a neutral impact would be for those Irish businesses as well. Now that doesn't quite compute with the fact that 25% of businesses have already suffered a negative impact as a result of Brexit. So it doesn't quite compute. You're seeing some different stats, Tony?
Yeah, we saw like Connacht and the Ulster kind of border counties, 75% of them thought that Brexit would negatively impact their business within 12 months. That's sort of like a survey of kind of Bank of Ireland customers. Even, Dublin, like in Leinster, excluding Dublin, it was 62%. So the general feeling is that Brexit is going to have a negative impact, and I think that is, when you see results of that and you think it's going to have a negative impact, there's two things you should do. One is you should kind of go, okay, how do we embrace that? How do we embrace this information? How do we, what do we need to do to make sure that negative impact is minimized? I think people are doing the opposite thing. I think they're saying they're holding off on investment. We saw this in 2017. SME companies really held back on investments because they're just afraid, because they don't know where to invest and what to invest. So I think the noise doesn't help. Like the noise and the politics of it all does not help. because it's just creating more and more disturbances and more uncertainty for people, and that uncertainty is not helping anybody.
And you've both elaborated on the business point of view of what's going on in Northern Ireland. What's the temperature around the border, whether it would be a hard border or a soft border, or the peace process? What do you see, or what are you hearing about that? Or are people talking about it?
Oh, they are talking about it, and it's it's twofold. It's a twofold issue. Border, it's 300 miles. 30,000 people cross the border every day to commute to and from work. There's about 3.5 billion of goods transacted across it every year. So it is a problem, but it's a twofold problem. It is political and it's economics. On the political front, I understand in the border there's 275 land crossings. Yeah.
They're the official ones now.
They're
the official ones. But there's a few more.
But many of those, obviously, prior to the Good Friday Agreement, many of those were closed. There was sort of 20 official crossings, and those had police and army checkpoints at that. Nobody in the island of Ireland wants to go back to that environment. So that's number one. That's a part of that political process, and about sort of maintaining the sort of momentum that the country has generated over the last number of years. And then secondly, economic. We've talked about sort of the interconnectivity between the Northern Ireland and the Irish economies. They are so heavily connected. We talk about the goods, how many times they cross the border during the process. Particularly in the agri-food sector, it's just backwards and forwards across the border at various stages in that process. So there is an awful lot to talk, and then of course, very, very recently, again, where does the border sit? When we have Brexit, currently we've just got this internal border. Goods can cross the border, people can cross the border freely. On the 29th of March, in the absence of any agreement, we've got an external border. We've got an external border between
EU,
Northern Ireland as a region of the UK. And Ireland as being the gateway into the EU. So where does that border sit? Does it sit there between Northern Ireland or Ireland? Or, as many have suggested, gets pushed out to the Irish Sea? And again, how does that sit constitutionally within the UK? And I know Theresa May has come out and said, we can't have that. Clearly the unionist politicians in Northern Ireland said, absolutely not. We can't have a border that prevents Northern Irish businesses continue to provide goods or services.
What actually happened today was they said, okay, this is one option. This is option C. There's option A and B there, which is, and they're trying. I think the European Union are trying to put pressure on the British government. If you're saying that absolutely can't happen, then you need to come up with alternatives. Whether that is closer alignment to the EU because they're part of the custom union and they go along with the same kind of regulation and legislation, or secondly, whether they come up with some, I can't remember the phrase they use, but imaginative and
innovative technological solution.
There's an opportunity for somebody to make a lot of money.
Exactly. Well, I mean, just to have a bit of clarity on what the customs union mean, or actually what it doesn't mean. If the UK was to remain part of the customs union, it could not strike its own trade deals with any other country in the world. And that is what it comes down to. That is, the UK government have said that is a red line issue. And that's even separate to freedom of movement of people, but it just means then the conversation around international Britain or global Britain, it would then have to come in under the tariffs of the EU and all of the trade deals that the EU has made, including, say, for example, CETA or the recent the European-Japanese agreement that was made before Christmas.
Which I think is fascinating from the politics point of view, because the British government are saying, today what was said today can't happen. But at the same time, they're not saying we're not going to be part of the customs union. We can't be part of the customs unions. We can't be controlled by European Court of Justice, etc. So, from a politics point of view, it's going to be fascinating, because right now I don't see. And unfortunately, ABC, option D is the kind of nuclear option.
Well, option D is the hard border.
Hard border.
And that is what, as you say, Peter, nobody wants that. But thus far, the UK government hasn't been forthcoming with an idea. Now, I think it's very difficult for them because a lot of the people who were in the government didn't expect this to happen and were unprepared for it to happen. But the clock is ticking, and it's ticking very loudly. So we've looked at economics and we've looked at politics. If we now get into sectors, Tony, what sectoral insights have you seen, or could you share with us?
Obviously, we've touched upon it a few times. The agri sector is the one that is going to be, it's extremely worrying. The interconnectivity between the two just means being able to separate them is next to impossible. So that sector is going to be extremely, I think, unless some very imaginative stuff happens, it's going to be really, really in deep trouble. Other sectors, there are opportunities for other sectors, absolutely, and even in the agri, rather than going too negative, in the agri sector, I still think there's opportunities as well. I think historically Irish companies have really, expand in Ireland, and then the natural thing for them to do is to go across the water and expand the UK because we're so similar. I think to your point earlier in your introduction, I think Irish companies now are going to have, and agri companies are going to have to find different markets. They're going to have to, if they keep reliant as they are now, they just can't let the uncertainties could destroy them. Mm-hmm. So I think that agri sector really needs to start looking at Europe and beyond for exports. In Ireland, I can't remember, I think you have the exact percentage, but I think like 10, 15 years ago, or even 20 years ago, 74% of our exports were kind of UK based and stuff. I think we're down to 15% now.
Yep.
With the European Union being our biggest. Yep. But when you actually look at the sectors, the UK, that 15% is all sectors. When you look at the agri, it's still hugely reliant on the UK. So I think that one is going to be a big problem. Other sectors, you mentioned financial services. Financial services, again, Ireland is going to be the only English-speaking country in the European Union, which, and in order to get a passport into the European Union, I think you could have a huge opportunity for American, but also for UK banks, because UK banks are going to need to base themselves, not just banks, financial services companies are going to need to base themselves somewhere so they can get access to the European Union area. So I think you've got, on the one side, financial services, and we've heard a lot about foreign direct investment, and you've heard stuff about, Dublin doesn't have enough offices or houses and all the rest. I think that's a lovely problem to have compared to the rest of the country, which their businesses could be destroyed, And I think in between that, it's more specific to the type of business it is. But I think they're the two extremes: the agriculture and the FDI foreign services.
If I can just add a little bit of context to that, Minister Simon Coveney is now telling the world that Cork will be the second largest English-speaking city in the EU very, very soon. So I have to say he's really flying the red and white flag for us there, in fairness to him. On the point, I just want to elaborate on the point of financial services and just to delve down into one key thing that I'm sure Tony deals with every single day, and that is what's called the European passport. If I was to create a fund and I want to market this right around the EU, I simply get the European passport, and I can get that from the Irish Central Bank, the Portuguese Central Bank, thus far the Bank of England and so on, and therefore I can now market it right around the existing 28 states. When the UK leaves the EU, it will no longer be able to do that. So if it creates a fund and it wants to market all of the other states, it will then ultimately have to go to another state as a domicile and start there. And that is, you'll hear that being discussed a lot over the next couple of months, because that is in the city, you've got 1 million jobs focusing in financial services. 12% of the entire tax base of the UK is taken from that particular sector in that particular area. The European passport is key, and that would be a key negotiating element of what's going on there. I mentioned the 237 announcements for the IDA earlier. 2/3 of those were outside of Dublin. There is a real focus on Enterprise Ireland and the IDA of bringing that economic prosperity a little bit further out. So, for example, First Derivatives are in Newry, you might be aware of. State Street, who I know are in this building, they're in Wexford, they're in Kildare. There's Kerry Group are where the name suggests. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of pharmaceuticals in Cork and in Sligo and so on. So there's a real effort for that. Any one of you who thinks about coming home in the next 12 months, you will face that housing shortage. You will. Whether it's buying or renting, you will see it up close and personal. And that is probably the greatest crisis that faces the government today. With a 7% growing economy, that's probably the greatest crisis there. So I just want to add a little bit of context to all of those points. But I absolutely agree. I think agri on one side, foreign direct investment in the other. And the only other thing I would add to that is, while it's not a sector, it's important to mention SMEs. It's easiest, most cost effective and time efficient to go to the UK first. Like, you all know, if I'm in Dublin or I'm anywhere, if I'm anywhere close to Shannon, anywhere close to Waterford or Cork or anywhere, I can be in London for a meeting in the evening and I could have had a full working day earlier on. I can't do that in Sydney. I can't really do that with here. So therefore, while, as I say, SMEs are not a sector, we do need to be conscious that they will ultimately look to the UK first for all of those reasons. But if we come back to agri, Peter, can I ask you to stress test for us for a moment? Let's say there is no agreement. Let's say nothing is agreed until everything is agreed and nothing is agreed. Right, we are now in a situation of not just a hard border, but we're now, the UK and the EU are going to trade on WTO, World Trade Organization rules. Can you take us through what would happen there?
Okay, so WTO is basically the worst case scenario, it's the fallback position. So if there's no agreement, come 29th of March, WTO tariffs potentially apply to goods that are moved between sort of Northern Ireland and Ireland, or vice versa. So it's interesting, actually, what I've left on sort of everyone's seats there is just some analysis that Intertrade Ireland recently shared. And what it shows is it looks at sort of the sectoral composition of supply of goods between going from Ireland to Northern Ireland, from Northern Ireland back to the Republic of Ireland, and then equally from the Republic of Ireland into GB. So just again, in terms of looking at sort of the top three sectors there from Ireland to Northern Ireland, we can see their sectoral composition there. We've got, Ireland to Northern Ireland, we've got meat and fish, mineral products, and machinery and electrical. Now, if you take the meat and fish one under WTO scenario, that's the largest sectoral composition from supplies from Ireland to Northern Ireland. There's a potential 73.4% tariff under the WTO rules that are going to apply to that.
How many companies have a margin of that level in the first place? Never mind be able to give it in a tariff.
Yeah. Absolutely massive. Like, looking at the other ones, mineral products again is marginal, it's 1%, and likewise the machinery and electrical is 1.6%. So again, agri-food stands out. The same applies to Northern Ireland supplies back into the Republic. There, the biggest ones are dairy, foodstuffs, and residue of food and tobacco goods. Those are, again, on dairy, it's 64.1%. Foodstuffs 10.5%. Residue of food 7.7%. So all very significant tariffs applying under the WTO rules.
I think what's important, not only will there be tariffs, the way the agri industry has developed so much, especially like if you look at preparing fresh fruit for UK supermarkets. Ireland is one of the main provider of food into the UK supermarkets now. So not only do you have the problem with the tariffs, you also have the problem that now there's going to be a customs border. So there's going to be delays. There could be significant delays on getting through the customs. And that's going to be a huge impact. The way it works now is it's just, and I would also say that people's tastes have changed. People want fresh food. It's not like before, everybody wants everything to be fresh. And Ireland has got really, really good at that. Mm-hmm. I think, whether you like it or not, 1/5 of the burgers supplied in Europe come from Ireland, come from one area in Carlow. But that can't happen going forward, because the problem is that they're going to have to go through the border technically twice to get into the UK and to get out of the UK. Yeah. So that's going to really, really impact. So you're going to be caught on two sides. One, you've got your tariffs, so it's going to increase your cost. Two, you can't match the timeliness.
Yeah, and obviously you've got the decline in sterling as well to compound that. Just since I have the tax partner of Grant Thornton UK here, can I also ask you about the VAT on those tariffs? So how does that factor in?
So the VAT due will be on the customs inclusive value.
So it'll be the VAT, the 23% will be on top of the 74%.
Absolutely. So that's going to put huge pressure on the working capital requirements within a business. You have to sort of fund that. Many businesses will be able to reclaim that VAT, but you need to fund that sort of during that VAT cycle. So that's again what businesses need to be looking at now. They need to be insulating their balance sheet, being able to deal with that. So you have a question?
And this comes back to our earlier point. So you've got that scenario with the WTO where it could be 73%. You've got another, but at the same time you're hearing it won't be that. Something will be done. These politicians won't let that happen. So it'll be something different. So as a business, how do you plan for that? And and I think there's a lot of companies now, if they think, okay, I'm going to be faced with 73%, I may as well stop. You know what I mean? I may as well throw in the towel now. So, and I think that is causing people not to take action.
If you look outside the sort of agri-food sector, though, the average tariff that will apply under the WTO rules is 2.3%. So it is it's a much lower level. But again, how many businesses out there are actually trading on margins? Not far off that at the minute. So that's going to hit their bottom line straight away. And I think there are opportunities, with Ireland selling, trying to sell their food into GB. That is going to become uncompetitive. So again, there are opportunities potentially for Northern Ireland businesses to try and fill that gap and pick up the slack there. And that's why Irish businesses perhaps need to be looking at other export markets.
And that was where I was going to go next, actually, Peter. Is we are in the land of opportunity after all. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So given that we've looked at a lot of the negatives, and we certainly won't discount them, there are opportunities. You mentioned one there for Northern Ireland, and I would put that to you both. What do you see the opportunities being? I mentioned earlier about internally hedging was something that we've done. I've told you about our Enterprise Europe network that I've worked with. What do you see for Grand Thornton Bank of Ireland as well as your customers? What do you see being the opportunities here? Because we have to look at those too.
Yeah, I think businesses do need to look at their business models. They need to sort of re-engineer those models and look at fresh opportunities. Whether Brexit's happening or not, that's a sensible thing for businesses to do, is to keep reappraising their models. And I think there are opportunities to look at fresh markets, whether that be on a customer or a supplier base, and to actually look to improve their processes and become much more efficient. I think there are opportunities, whilst if you were to listen to the facts and one of the leaked government documents, which indicated that Northern Ireland is going to be one of the most adversely affected regions within the UK on the back of Brexit. There's a potential 12% reduction in economic activity over the next 5 years is what they're predicting to Northern Ireland. It's questionable whether you can rely on those. Again, before the referendum, there were a lot of there's a project fear issued, and a lot of statistics about sort of an economic collapse and doom.
An econoclips, I think they call that.
Yeah.
It was very tweetable anyway. An econoclips. An economic apocalypse. Jeez, there's a lot of syllables in that now. Yeah, I believe that was what it was.
And yes, there's huge fluctuations in currency and sort of the currency at the time, but again, there wasn't that economic collapse. So again, can those projections be relied on? But Northern Ireland is a unique place, unique opportunity, I believe, and for Northern Irish businesses. There, we are the only region of the UK with a land border with Ireland and effectively Europe. Then, so I think there could be opportunities for Irish businesses to potentially set up in Northern Ireland to retain access into the UK market, and vice versa for businesses within the UK to look to Ireland, as we've seen already with many of the big players, such as Barclays and Vincent Masons and Almac, etc., and to retain access into the EU market. And I think the other thing to say, and again, putting my tax partner hat on, within Northern Ireland, we have, there's been a lot of push from businesses to have a devolved rate of corporation tax. Today we actually have, since 2015 in fact, we have a Corporation Tax Northern Ireland Act, which devolves the power to the Northern Ireland Executive to set the rate of corporation tax in Northern Ireland, and it came out when they were meeting, and said that rate would be 12.5%. So
that number sounds very familiar.
Yeah, it does. So again, you could look at the island of Ireland as having a rate of 12.5%, and again, working together in terms of providing access into the UK or access into the EU markets.
So if I could summarise particularly the opportunities you're seeing are in just running a better, leaner, fitter business in the first place. The second one is perhaps the negative projections won't be as bad. And the number three is the decline in the corporation tax rate from 20% down to 12.5%, and offering an entire island-wide opportunity then to be in both the UK and the EU. Okay, Tony?
Agree with all those. I also think it's going to force some companies to kind of lose a bit of complacency. What I mean by that is we have a lot of customers. We've got one customer in particular. It's been a fantastically successful customer for the last number of years, based out of I think it's primarily in Leitrim and Roscommon area. They did 91% of their exports went to the UK. When Brexit happened, they said, okay, we need to look elsewhere. We need to, they were quite progressive, and they started exporting to Germany and to France. UK now counts for, I think it's 24% of their business. That's not because 60% dropped off the UK. It's because their overall revenue increased 3 times. So there is a big market out there. There is complacency where people just like, I know the UK, I do it.
Yep.
So I think it will get rid of some of that complacency, which I think would be good. I think we mentioned already, Ireland as English-speaking common law country in the European Union is going to be very positive. That can only bring opportunities as well.
Okay. Just before we open it up to the floor, because it's important to do that as well, and we're very interested in hearing your own points. Can I just ask to hone in on the point here about the fact that we are talking tonight about an all-island paradigm shift. As a company that's based in Dublin, it would make absolute sense for me personally to think, okay, if we want to continue to do business in the UK the way we're doing it as smoothly as possible, given the possibility that the UK would be a third country, assuming a hard Brexit, WTO rules, etc., it makes absolute sense for me, Peter, to go to Newry, to go to Derry, to go to Belfast, and to set up a regional office there. And I'm not the only one who's thinking that. So is there a boom opportunity for, let's say, Newry, Dundalk, or let's say even the Dublin-Belfast corridor to be straddling both sides, in effect?
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe there is. And, only earlier this week, it was announced, InvestNI actually announced it was a Dublin-based IT business, have agreed to set up a sort of delivery office in Belfast, providing sort of 60 jobs with an average salary of 50,000 a year. And again, they just see Brexit as an opportunity. I think the chief executive actually says Brexit is a bonus. So it is about sort of looking at those opportunities and looking at those markets. And Northern Ireland there's an opportunity just to go literally half an hour, a few miles up the road there. And establish a presence in Northern Ireland. You may not be paying more tax again if a Northern Ireland corporation tax rate can be introduced, but you have access into the UK market, and then equally we'll see sort of the equivalent of businesses looking to relocate into Ireland to maintain access into the EU market.
I would just add to that, if I look at Bank of Ireland, our share price has kind of been hit pretty badly.
I'm shares in you, so I know.
Yeah, I'm only talking about the last few years, not the last 10 years. But in the last few years...
we'll stay on topic.
In the last few years, we've been, I think 40% of our assets are in the UK. So we've been viewed as an Irish UK and as one that's going to get really hammered by Brexit. But I think people forget, the UK is a huge market. So I think for us, we're ring-fenced in the UK. So we're passported there. It's a kind of a separate division, separately capitalised board of directors, all the rest. So I think for us, actually being in the UK and servicing that market, there'll be negatives because obviously Brexit is going to impact the economy somewhat. But I do think it will be positive for us because that is still a massive market, and I think people are not underestimating it, but they're kind of saying, oh, if we've got to import into that market, it's going to hurt us. But if you're in that market and you do well, and there will be a lot of people exiting that market, so there are opportunities.
And I'm really glad you brought that up because that was the point I also wanted to make, and that is that if people are not looking at the UK or exiting out of it, you still are dealing with 55 million people. It's $1.5 trillion economy. I mean, that's a big... Even the Northern Powerhouse, which is Greater Manchester is 5 million people, same population as Ireland. So, and that alone is a 10 million economy that actually a lot of people don't even realise is only 2 hours of a train ride away. So there is absolutely, there are those opportunities as well, and particularly if you base yourself north of the border there, you can have an even better way in. So, at this stage, you've heard a lot of our thoughts, and if we take a couple of questions, it'll be great to hear from you.
Firstly, thanks for. I'm still struggling that it might be difficult to get Wexford strawberries.
State Street will sponsor them. Don't worry.
But just from what we're talking there, there's a clear split between agriculture and maybe other benefits. So like working in financial services, all of the opportunity I see is like, oh well, such and such firm, Barclays, whoever, are going to set up in Dublin, so there'll be opportunities in Dublin. But then obviously we're saying that real affected areas will be rural areas. Do they have a strong enough voice into these negotiations to say, no, like, beneficial for Dublin, but it's not beneficial for us?
Well, I might take that first, and then I'm very happy to open it over. At the All Island Dialogue, they were the voices. And I mentioned the 6 agencies, but there was also a lot of civic groups, a lot of political groups, etc. When I think about rural Ireland, and I think as somebody from there, when I think of that, they probably, one of the best things we ever did over the last couple of years was introduce the Wild Atlantic Way. Now you all know the road was always there. Do you know what I mean? We didn't create a new road at all, just put a name on it. And doing something like that, and now what the Ancient East has done, and so on, even still, 80% of Irish tourism, the money goes to Cork, Kerry, Galway and Dublin, still. 1% goes to Tipperary. So from that point of view, that has been where a lot of the voice has been heard, and something has really made a difference. If there was one area that I would, if I could just magic up one solution, I was Pascal Donoghue, and there was one place that I would absolutely put money in, it would be putting it into broadband. Because I know what it's like to be in Cork trying to deliver a webinar about the European markets, and you can only hear stops and starts basically along the way, and that changes completely when I can have a conference call with anyone in the world, and that does certainly make an impact. You all know probably what it's been like since we've all had the new road. The new road is anywhere from Cork to Dublin, Limerick to Cork, Dublin to Galway. The new road is still being talked about. It's there now in 15 years. So I think to a large degree, in terms of the negotiation, unless rural Ireland is represented in a sectoral way, there is not a Chamber of Commerce for rural Ireland. There is a Minister for Rural Ireland now, that's Heather Humphreys, you're probably aware of that. And she has a plan around 69 particular action points, just like the Action Plan for Jobs was. So I think that it's going to be up to the sectors and the individual parts of rural Ireland to club together and make sure that voice is heard, but I would say at the moment, not so much, would be my answer. I don't know if you want to.
I think they get a bad rap, but the government agencies have been, if you compare the government agencies versus the action that they're taking versus in many cases the inaction the UK government inactions are taking, I think they have done a stellar job. Like if I look at Board BIA, like they're out there the whole time. Like I can't remember something in 2017 they had 261 visits to Europe. You know what I mean? So they're out there, and I think that's the best way. It's the agencies like that are representing them. That there's too much focus on the companies coming to Dublin, the housing problems, and all that.
But they're easy headlines.
They're easy headlines.
60 jobs starting in Silicon Dock is an easy headline. 6 jobs in Macroom or Clonakilty or Roscommon isn't as punchy.
No, it isn't. And that's where I think it's a lot of the work that's happening is unheard of. You know what I mean? It's not getting publicised, but I do think there is people out there doing a lot of work trying to represent that, because they realise that the agricultural sector, if somebody doesn't stand up for them, it's probably not as much as needs to be done, but they are trying to, and if somebody doesn't, it's going to be a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah.
I would add, and this is probably off topic slightly, but I would add one thing. When you mentioned your threats and all the rest, I do think one problem for us is in the EU, we are losing our biggest voice in the EU, as in the EU. I think we are going to miss the UK. Like a lot of what we got out of the European Union over the last few years has been partnering with the UK. Yeah. We've got a very similar mentality. We've got a very similar work ethic, very similar industries, and in many ways the UK has protected us over the last 20 years. I think we're going to lose that. I think that is going to be a risk.
I do see the power in Europe shifting to the east and shifting to the south by virtue of the fact that the second largest country in the EU will be leaving the table. So I unfortunately agree, and that's why I brought up the point about the acceleration of Eurozone fiscal integration being a point. I see a question there from
can you talk about the possibility that it's not going to happen?
Unfortunately, I don't see that. I don't see that it won't happen. Sorry, that's double negative. I think Brexit will happen. I have spent a lot of time figuring out why this happened. And I think to a large degree it happened because a lot of people weren't being listened to. Yes, I think there was Project Fear. I think there was another project on the other side. There's a lot of talk around this. In order to turn back, I don't think it's in the British psyche to do that. Like, we love referendums. Like, we do them twice, 3 times. We love the day out. We're okay to do it again. We're okay to do it again a couple of times, like if required. But I don't think that's in the UK psyche. Today's speech by John Major was pivotal to that. John Major previous Tory Prime Minister said that there should be an open vote in Parliament, namely in the House of Commons, or there should be a possibility of a second referendum. I just don't. I think we've gone too far. Now, what could happen is probably what many of you might have heard that Jeremy Corbyn has put forward, which is that the UK would stay in the customs union. I think one way or the other, and I could be wrong, but I think that this time, 5 years' time, the UK will be out of the EU. Now, whether they won't seek a door back in again, depending on a change of government and so on, I wouldn't rule that out at some stage, but I think Brexit will happen. I don't know about you two.
No, I would agree with that conclusion. I think Brexit will happen. However, the point you're making there is what we're hearing from businesses on the ground.
Oh,
There's huge amounts of complacency, and it says, "Oh, look, it's never going to happen." It is, and it's actually coming full steam ahead. It's we talked about sort of this 2-year Brexit process. We're now just almost a year away from the actual hard exit, and that's what we're sort of saying. There's a message being pushed out there that says businesses actually need to take action now.
Yeah.
They need to appraise the impact that it's going to have on them, at least understand what the potential impact of a WTO worst case scenario is. What is the potential cash flow disadvantages to your business of having sort of the VAT on the customs inclusive element of that. Again, and people, how are you going to source the talent that you need? Post Brexit, have you done a residency audit on your staff? Are they going to be settled or temporary workers?
Yeah.
And again, how are you going to pull that? Are you going to train your domestic people, and this is within the sort of UK market? How are you going to become, as the battle for talent increases and intensifies, how do you make your business an employer of choice so that people want to come to work for you? So these are issues that businesses need to be addressing now. And again, as we said before, they're good, sensible decisions and sort of plans that businesses should be taking, irrespective of whether Brexit is happening or not.
Can you see any way?
No, and
I
would recommend people to watch John Major's speech today. It was fantastic, and he gave so many very valid points as to why the hell are we doing this. But the biggest shame is it wasn't 2 years ago. Like, he should have said it 2 years ago. They should have said it 2 years ago. They didn't have the voice.
Do you remember the day that John Major and Tony Blair walked over the Peace Bridge in Derry? And they did say it at the time, but at the time they were, sure, look, they're two has-beens and that kind of thing. I think at the time, I actually think we didn't, and myself included, we didn't understand why people wanted out in the first place. And had we spoken about that openly, I don't know whether we'd still be here today or not. That's not the point. I think we should have listened harder. I should have listened harder.
I would agree. I still don't think the British people realise what the impacts of this is going to be to them.
Yeah.
Like, I think they're still on about the 350 million bus and the benefits that come and all the rest.
It was a great bus.
It was a great bus. The best party slogan ever.
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
This has been fascinating to listen to. An economist and a banker and an accountant. But Brexit, it really is a political process. It started as politics. Corbyn's all about politics in the next election. And the EU has political strains. Poland is telling them to back off, not tell them what to do within their borders. Turkey's saying, we don't want to join if you're going to make us do certain things. Germany, rise of the populist parties in Germany and France. So who's watching out for the politics that could screw Ireland totally regarding the border and everything else when the EU has to decide how to survive, given all of those other strains?
Okay, and I'll take that first. I think this is a key reason why the EU is making it so difficult for the UK and is rejecting element after element, because one of the key things that I'm watching out for is something that's happening next week, which is the Italian election. It's happening the 4th of March. Everyone's talking about it. It was the French election of 2018. And if the EU, A, lets the UK have the same access without as much, if they have the same access as they had before without having as much responsibility, so many more countries would walk. So I think that the EU will try to make an example out of the UK to hold the whole thing together. That's precisely the reason why I think, like, Angela Merkel has been very, very busy for the last 4 months trying to pull together a government of differing characters. Whereas, and this has created the space. That's why I say is that we haven't been paying enough attention to what Macron is doing, because he has almost Europeanized France. He's lowered labour laws, all of the things. He's giving Angela Merkel a reason to say, we kind of owe you one. And I take your point about Turkey. I mean, what Turkey has agreed to do is to say, okay, we want access. We will give you access to, we have access to, and we won't have a say over it because of the size of the population there. I mean, Poland is a different story, quite simply because of the number of people that has been trying to come in from a very lower cost of living point of view. I mean, the Irish economy, to a large degree, owes an awful lot to people who came in at a lower cost when a lot of Irish people wouldn't do the jobs that they would do. But I also think you need to look at what's going on in Italy, at the populism there. You know, I spend a lot of time in Netherlands and Belgium, and there, they've seen populism, they've seen it up close and personal. They're not quite sure that they like what they see. You know, there's an awful lot of attention being poured onto what's going on here as well. So I think, you know, we have yet to see a populist party rise in Ireland. Yes, populist, anti-immigration party. That there hasn't been the space created for that in Ireland yet. So I think we're watching. We are watching, and that's why, to Tony's point, it's so important that we make sure our voice is being heard in Europe and that we are having these conversations, because they really matter, not just for our future, but for our children and our grandchildren's future as well.
As much as companies have to change and stop being complacent, Ireland is the same.
I agree with you.
We now have to go out and find partners in the European Union that we can partner with that have the same mentality or the same aims or goals as us. And there's a lot of scrambling going on by Irish politicians to suddenly make new friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to, if you're really brief, we have to, we're on Facebook Live, so we have to end very soon. All right, great.
Well, I was actually going to address that gentleman over here. I've lived in this country many years, but I've also lived in the UK. And I agree with you, the insularity of the UK for not being addressed or heard by their own politicians, which aggravated the situation.
Yeah.
If that had been addressed, we would not be sitting here today. That's an issue. And I think this gentleman's idea, Peter, in terms of the 12%, filling it between South of Ireland and the whole Ireland, I think it's a fabulous idea. I think we could actually show the way forward. I think we've got to forget about the politicians and the business, and I've got to go with the programme. We've got a year left, and the agribusiness is a $1 trillion company worldwide, and I'd like more to see happening on the ground with local people on that. Because that is, if that industry gets hit, we're finished.
There is, when I look at the offensive from the Irish government in terms of agriculture, they are. It's not about what Ireland Inc. can do. It's about the arrangement between. It's basically what happened today. It's because of the arrangement in which that will go forward. As I mentioned, like Board BIA are presenting their Brexit barometer, and it is also up to us as individual businesses. Now, I'm not in agriculture, but it is up to us to go out and as Tony says, to go out and make new friends. All right. But the other thing then to bear in mind is the impact of what agriculture is to the local economies. Is that for every euro that's lost in that area, the knock-on effect that can have.
What I'm still amazed at is the fact that you've got 80% of the agri still going through the UK.
Well, it's not just agri. It's all of imports and exports. It's all of manufacturing as well. But it kind of makes sense though, because I mean I was in a beer brewery speaking about this actually in Lisburn. There just about 6 months ago, and they were saying where they got the hops from versus where they got the barley from, and where they got the staff from, and where they got they were doing this zigzag up and down, and all none of this was questioned before. None of this was questioned before. You probably know where I'm talking about as well. I can't quite remember the name of it. That's exactly it. In fact, I couldn't find parking at all there. But anyway, that's beside the point. But it is all of these things, and also your point about the fact that and both of your points about an economist, a banker, I didn't realise that, and also a tax partner. The thing is that what also I really like about what the Irish government has done is that it had the All Ireland civic dialogue. It didn't just bring a whole load of business voices in together. It brought somebody who was representative of the homeless in London. It brought in somebody from Northern Ireland. It brought in all aspects, the entire political spectrum, north and south of the border. So there is also the Global Irish Economic Forum, and there's the Global Irish Civic Forum. There's a whole infrastructure there as well around not just the business aspects of the diaspora, but also the civic elements as well. So I think a lot has been done, but also, and this is where I want to finish this. I believe Marianne is now at the right time. Is that after all, it's the people in here. Like at the end of the day, we're the people who are going to go out and do the real trade deal. we're going to be the people who are going to sell Ireland and sell Ireland's wares and so on. So it's important that we continue our connectivity. And that leads me right into mentioning that the IIBN Global Conference is on in Dublin this year. It's on the 9th of November. Now, I have made my first footprint into the UK through IIBN London, and it's been hugely helpful to me. And also the organisation is expanding more so into Eastern Europe as well over the next year. You'll be hearing a lot more about that. But, you know, make sure and use the network. That's what we're here for. Like, I'm having lunch tomorrow with Susan O'Brien, as I mentioned. Marianne was, and Maura, and Michelle. So I won't say any more about that, don't worry. It was only one drink, I promise. But the point of the matter is that, you know, connectivity is our USP. That is what makes us different. So make sure, if you are coming home and you want us to introduce to anyone, you know, send an email to Alva or to Connor or to me or to anybody else. Fill our inboxes, sure. We've nothing more to do. And thank you very much. Thank you so much to Marianne for organising tonight. Thank you to Tony Dunn from Bank of Ireland, Peter Legg from Grant Thornton, and most of all, thank you to you.
Thank you.